Hey everybody, and welcome to the launch of my new show, Game Over. While Terror Obscura shows you the lighter side of horror movies, and The Signal will soon be bringing you some original horror writing, I realized that there was an entire entertainment medium that I was ignoring. Video games. Yes, while you all know that I'm a huge fan of fright flicks and horror lit, you may be less aware of my love of interactive horror. And although A Nightmare on Elm Street may have been the switch that truly turned me into a Fear fan, there were plenty of stepping stones along the way, and a lot of those were great horror games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Castlevania, among others. Now, you may be wondering, is this another review show in the same vein as Terror Obscura, or is this a Let's Play, where you'll be seeing me work through the entire game? Well, truth be told, a bit of both. You see, I want to do something different than a straight-up review to keep things interesting, but Let's Plays have one major drawback. Sometimes they are boring as hell. To combat this, all the footage you see will be me playing, and we will be following my progress as I make my way through each part of the game. But I will be trimming the fat, editing the dull or quiet bits out, and inserting cutaways for jokes or even sketches. As for which game I should start with, that was a tough call, so I left it to you, the fans. After a quick poll on Facebook and Twitter, we had some interesting results. Resident Evil, one of the most prolific and venerable horror game franchises, was dead last by a considerable margin. Very much better was Silent Hill, which I'd secretly been crossing my fingers for, but coming in with just one more vote was a game that I'd thrown in just for the sake of variety. I'm talking about Parasite Eve, and while it may not have been my #1 choice, I am glad that I get to discuss what I feel is a sadly undermentioned game. But before I go into what makes it so great, let's have a bit of background. For starters, some of you are probably wondering, what is Parasite Eve? Contrary to what you might be thinking, the title was not conceived after someone had a particularly nasty divorce from a woman named Evelyn. Instead, it comes from the translated title of a Japanese novel by Hideaki Sina. Hideaki Sina! Wrong Sina, wrong spelling, wrong joke. Though, from the effect the novel had, that's not too far of a stretch. Parasite Eve was a colossal hit in Japan, and inspired not only an admittedly middling film, but served as a shot in the arm that spawned the J-horror craze whose effects are still felt today. And while I would love to talk more about the novel and movie, that would take away time that we could spend playing the game, and it would offer up a few spoilers besides. Either way, the rights to Sina's novel were picked up for development into a game by none other than Square. And while the original author wasn't involved in its creation, he could rest easy knowing that it was in the hands of a team that was at the top of their game. Regardless of how you feel about their current output, Square were the undisputed masters of the RPG in the 1990s. And I'll fight any man that says different. With works like Xenogears and one of the best 4 Final Fantasy games ever produced, it seemed like they could do no wrong in the 1990s. But why talk about it when I can show you instead? So sit down and strap in, cause I want to play a game. And let me start by complimenting Parasite Eve for its badass pre-game sequence. While they've fallen a bit by the wayside in recent years, I love how developers used to seemingly delight in creating a trailer just to whet your appetite for the game you're about to play. Of course, one could argue the stupidity of creating an advertisement for a game that the players most likely already bought, but in an era when games are released half-finished, it's nice to see a developer not only completing the game, but doing the equivalent of a victory lap. So once we're past that, it's time to start the game proper. After we've taken in that gorgeous PS1 New York skyline, we're introduced to our main character, and an all-too-common challenge in 90s RPGs. Must not rename character, but Smurf! Oh, thank God! Another victory for my better angels. Still, malicious player naming isn't the full extent of her woes, as Officer Brea. Jesus, now that I say it out loud, she might have thanked me if I went with Butt Smurf Brea. She's on a blind date with a man so waspy that I'm tempted to spray him with insecticide. Fortunately, the game's willing to give you control pretty quickly, and I immediately am able to slip into character by running the fuck away from him. Of course, that is a bit ungrateful. After all, his dad, who I should probably be dating instead, did get us tickets to the hottest show in town. Holy shit, this season of Game of Thrones is fucking awesome! Okay, so maybe not. But that comment about this being the hottest ticket in town proves to be strangely prophetic, because after launching into an aria with lip-syncing that would do Milli Vanilli proud, she apparently decides to switch songs to a selection from Carrie the Musical. Still loved it, but something tells me that word of mouth from the audience may not be so kind. Well, maybe that won't matter. Something tells me that this is one of those one performance only type of deals. Still, at least it's only slightly deadlier than the average performance of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. And yes, comedians will still be getting mileage out of that one for some time to come. God damn it, are you telling me that the entire audience goes up in smoke and this ass bag goes entirely unpunished? Thank you! Curiously receiving no XP for avoiding a night of what would have been deeply mediocre sex, it's time to take to the stage for our first boss fight, pitting an armed NYPD officer against a weaponless white girl that probably weighs 110 pounds soaking wet. But first, it's time for things to get a little steamy. Oh yeah, I'll bet it is. At any rate, we get our first taste of gameplay as we face off against Melissa, aka Eve. I've gotta say, I really love the mechanics in older games like this. Unlike modern games where everything either plays out in real time or goes to slow-mo, each combatant in Parasite Eve has an action gauge that fills at a different rate, and once it's full, you get to take an action. And while you're doing so, the game is completely paused, meaning that you can plan, strategize, grab a snack, or do your taxes while your enemy calmly waits for you to decide which boot to plant up their ass. As for the fight itself, it's a pretty simple affair, as Melissa will simply continually fire out the same energy beam attack again and again until she goes down. Why, you'd have to be some kind of moron to get tagged with Of course, even the worst player can take her down fairly easily, and after a little dialogue, she floats off to punch a hole through several inches of concrete with an attack that probably would have been pretty useful against you. At this point, you have the choice of either hopping down or checking in with your backup. Really, apart from a brief cinematic, there's no reason to do the latter, apart from a cop that gives you some spare ammo. And gives you some 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 ammo. Seriously, does this guy just stuff every pocket with ammo before he goes on duty? Something tells me this guy is a police brutality YouTube video sensation in the making. Anyway, back in the hole, giggity, you encounter a little girl in a hospital, Johnny, who Aya finds somewhat familiar. Yes, it's dangerous to go alone. Here, take this! Once the ghostly little tot has schlepped her way out of existence, you can proceed further into the theater, encountering several locked doors and a pretty awesome cutscene. A standard RPG trope! Yup, it looks like even in a modern setting, you have to start out by fighting rats, spiders, and other vermin. After wiping out the rat, it's time to explore. To the left, there's a locker with some meds, and another containing a pointlessly expository death scene. To the right, you get to bump into Pennywise Jr., who promptly tries to haul ass. Operative word being tries. In true RPG fashion, you can either go off to try and save him, or loot the place while trusting that the situation will resolve itself. Either way, if you check back the way you came, you'll find that Chuckles is now a crispy critter. Aya Brea, Super Detective. And it's with deductive skills like that that we'll be facing such mysteries as who it is that Aya calls to save her progress, because I could seriously use that number too, and why this theater needs not one, but two jump scare parrots. Alright, Polywana beaten, let's do this. Wow, that was exactly as easy as you'd expect. Anyway, after your own performance of Bye Bye Birdie, and with the key you find in the wardrobe department, you're free to explore those previously locked rooms, which contain some pretty useful items, a few secret areas, but mostly enough rats and, weirdly, parrots, to make me wonder if some got loose during Pirates of Penzance, and they're going to need to hire a bizarrely specific breed of exterminator. Regardless, you'll eventually make it to Melissa's dressing room, where you find not only a key to the next area, but also some insight into what's been going on in Melissa's conveniently abandoned secret diary. Ah yes, she became too hot and collapsed. Humble brag much? Also, you're one to talk about abusing medications, Aya. Just look at your own inventory. Either way, key in hand, it's time to go through that door, and once you encounter Melissa, now completely taken over by Eve, it's time to engage in a battle to see who's hotter. Aya wins! Although I've gotta admit, this is a pretty awesome character design. Helena Bottom Carter from the waist up, Giant Blue Banana from the waist down. Regardless, it's time for our second boss battle, as Aya does her best to take down Banana Butt. It's a relatively simple affair, just like the first one, and in a way, even easier. Rather than running around in a half circle, all you have to do is stay mostly still. Even people who took a shot during the first fight should be able to, well, fuck. Of course, unless you severely fuck up, this should be another easy fight. A little technobabble and some flashbacks later, and it's time to follow Eve into the obligatory sewer level. Yes, for some reason, every horror game feels the need to present the player with a level of labyrinthine tunnels and ankle-deep crap that serves no real purpose other than to give you a creepy environment to wander around in for longer than you probably want to. Of course, you never know. There may be a puzzle down here worthy of Aya's detective skills. That'll do! Brain teaser resolved, you run afoul of Eve on the other side, who quickly Freddy Kruegers the fuck off, leaving you to fight a mutant sewer gator. Sadly, without a Resident Evil 2 style oxygen cylinder on hand, you're forced to do it the hard way by emptying your gun into his ass, then blowing his damn head off when he starts spitting fire at you. And note to self, I've gotta start watching that reality show about Florida gator hunters. Regardless, putting his lights out rewards you with a piece of armor, which I'm just going to go ahead and imagine is a gator skin purse. Being the only survivor, apart from Weenie McGee, the douche date, she finds herself the center of some serious media attention, at least until her partner shows up. Yeesh. Iowa Officer Ammo bags an apology. Looks like somebody else wins the most likely to need a body camera award. This being the 90s, when heroic cops decking the annoying media guy was a thing, Daniel loads up Aya, and the two make their way into the night to file what is quite possibly going to be the most interesting police report in history. A quick glance at the game's world map later, and it's time for Chapter 2. And if it's time for Chapter 2 of this game, that means that it's time to wrap up Part 1 of this video. So far, while I've played Parasite Eve before, it's nice to be reminded of how much I like this game. First, I like how the story presents you with some mysteries. Unless you were paying some serious attention in high school science class, you'll be scratching your head along with Aya, and it's the good kind of confusion. Rather than feeling like they're just throwing out science terms to seem smart, you get the idea that all this is actually going somewhere. Plus, while the scope and scale of events feels surprisingly epic, helped along by the fact that New York City is a real place, there's also a feeling that there are personal stakes here, as the brief flashes of personality Aya shows off, exasperated date, tough cop that keeps her head while facing the inexplicable, and occasional flashes of vulnerability make her, in a single chapter, more relatable than some characters are in an entire game. And I'm also a big fan of the mechanics so far. Either knowingly or not, by incorporating RPG elements into what is essentially a survival horror game, they've cleared up a ton of issues that were plaguing the genre at the time, particularly in regards to combat. Whereas games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil offered static cameras in many areas that might not let you get a clear view of the action and which may result in your getting jumped by enemies that are just off screen, the random battles of Parasite Eve always make it clear when you're in a fight, and the stationary camera and boundaries keep it obvious where everyone is. Some might argue that being alerted to the presence of an enemy like that takes some of the tension out of the experience, but I'd argue that event-based scares and never knowing when or even if a fight will take place more than makes up for it. On top of that, by giving you a clear radius of efficacy for your weapons and letting things take care of themselves within that radius, they eliminate the tedium and guesswork that made combat in other series scary for all the wrong reasons. It's a great start to a great game, and I look forward to seeing you all in Part 2.